Haruka was an ugly, disgusting, worthless, and miserably alone. He could not find a place among his classmates, not even in his own world, and on a strange day, he and his companions were summoned into another world, where each of them was granted skill points to choose their magical powers. But since he had arrived late, nothing remained for him except the trivial abilities that no one desired. Yet, he did not care, for he was accustomed to isolation and preferred to walk his path alone, but his life changed completely. On the first day of school, we come to know Haruka. He was a weak-spirited student, having no friends at all, always sitting alone in his corner, for none of his classmates spoke to him or approached him. Being a withdrawn boy, he spent his time reading books in solitude, and so no one ever cared about him. Through this, we discover that the class he studied in was divided into 3 groups. The first group was the popular students who boasted of their appearance. The second group was the beautiful girls who enjoyed wide popularity. The third group was those boys whose only concern was to build muscles and go to the gym every day. Naturally, there was no group that suited Haruka, and so he was used to sitting alone most of the time. Suddenly, without any warning, a magical circle appeared in the middle of the classroom. Everyone panicked and grew frightened, but Haruka looked overjoyed, for he realized from the very first moment that this circle would transport them into another world. Yet he thought to himself, if I go to that new world, I will not be able to read the books I love. Thus he began to justify to himself that he must escape quickly before he was caught by that magical circle. But he found the door tightly locked and tried repeatedly to break it, all in vain. Then he climbed toward the air conditioning vent in the ceiling, saying in his mind, there is no way that circle will reach me here. Yet the magical circle swallowed the entire classroom indeed, and all the students were transported into the new world. And when Haruka too was transferred, he found himself in an empty place, whiteness surrounding him from every side. He sat thinking, wondering, it is expected that before me should appear a wizard or a sorceress, or even an old sage, for they are usually the rulers of the new world. Suddenly, before him stood an aged man with strange features, looking almost insane, and he spoke with a mocking tone. What are you doing here? All your friends have already moved into the other world, and you alone remain stuck here. Haruka listened to him laugh without understanding exactly what he meant. Then the old man said, come, take your statistics quickly. We have no time to waste, and hurry at once into the new world. At that moment, a giant screen appeared before Haruka, filled with magical skills. But the shock was that all his classmates had already chosen the powerful skills, leaving behind only those pitiful and weak ones. Thus Haruka was forced to look at the few options remaining, such as the skill of luck and the skill of farming. Then he cried out in anger at the old man, give me a strong skill instead of this nonsense. If I reach the new world with these pathetic abilities, I will not be able to do anything, and I will die immediately. But the old man, having run completely out of patience, ignored his objections and granted him all the worthless skills that remained on the screen. Then, without any delay, he pushed him hurriedly toward the new world. Suddenly, Haruka found himself in a vast forest. While still confused, he noticed a bag placed before him. As soon as he opened it, he discovered that it was a magical bag, capable of holding anything he placed inside. Within the bag, he found new clothes, and he put them on with overwhelming joy, as though it were the very first real gift he had ever received. After that, he turned toward the statistics screen to look at the skills he had obtained, but he was astonished to find that they were all of little worth. Among them was the skill of luck, and another extremely strange one called the skill of solitude. This latter skill meant that he could not form any party, and would be forced to complete his journey in this world entirely on his own. Looking around and seeing none of his classmates, he realized that he would indeed walk the entire path by himself. He muttered, since I possess the skill of solitude, I will not be able to form a team anyway. Haruka began to explore the forest in search of food and a place to shelter for the night, saying to himself, if I sleep in the forest without protection, dangerous creatures might appear and end my life. Among his skills, he found one useful ability. He could now identify anything his eyes fell upon in the forest, its name and type. This ability aided him in gathering food, as he could distinguish between poisonous fruits and those safe to eat. After collecting enough, he went to the river to drink, exhausted by his thirst. There his eyes caught sight of the entrance to a dark cave. He hesitated for a moment, then thought that he could make it his dwelling, hoping not to find monsters inside. He entered the cave cautiously and drew a lamp from his magical bag to light his way. After making sure it was free of creatures, he gathered some wood and lit a fire using one of his skills. Sitting in warmth and safety, he set up his small tent and slept until morning. When he awoke, he felt an overwhelming happiness that he was still alive and that no monster had attacked him while he slept. He took out his small pot and prepared a delicious meal from the food he had gathered the previous day. While enjoying his meal, he thought, I need to secure this cave well so that monsters will not attack me at some later time. As he was gathering more food, his eyes suddenly fell upon a shocking sight. Standing directly before him were two forest goblins. In that instant he froze with fear, for it was the very first time he had seen goblins face to face. But soon Haruka felt reassured when he realized that the goblins before him were low level and not strong at all. He muttered to himself in doubt, "I wonder, can I defeat them alone or not?" Then he drew out his worn wooden staff and declared firmly, "I must get rid of them, for in the future I may face goblins stronger than this level." Haruka used what little magic he had to strengthen that pitiful staff, then charged without hesitation at the goblins in attack. His staff came down upon the head of the first one, the blow leaving it reeling and staggering. He did not stop, but struck again with a second blow that finished it. As for the other goblin, it grew furious at the sight of its companion falling and tried to launch an assault, but its attacks were weak and clumsy. Haruka evaded them with ease, then gathered his magical power and delivered a fierce strike that sent it flying away, ending it completely. Afterward, he went to the river and washed his face in relief, overwhelmed with joy at having slain his first monsters in this new world. He then returned to his cave to eat once again, and discovered that he had gained a weapon from the goblins he had defeated. Yet the weapon was terribly weak, heavy, and useless. He opened his status screen, and his heart overflowed with happiness when he found that his level had risen to level 2, and all of his basic stats had increased. Unable to contain himself, he danced in a strange manner, like a swan celebrating his success. Then he slept peacefully, waking the next day hungry. He sat preparing his food, but he grew weary of eating the same plants day after day. He sighed with frustration. "I want to taste meat. I am sick of this plant food." Yet he was forced to eat what lay before him, lest he waste his time in vain. He then decided to go out and train to raise his level. Before leaving the cave, he remembered that all his skills were ridiculous and useless, and so he wondered, which skill is best for training now? Though he felt despair, he went into the forest once more to gather herbs and mushrooms. Soon he grew tired and said, "I must look for meat. I cannot spend my whole life eating weeds." When he lost all hope of finding meat, he resolved to begin serious training. He ran at full speed, smiling as he noticed how much lighter his body felt in this world. He swung his wooden staff swiftly in practice until another group of goblins appeared before him. He charged at them with his magic and managed to defeat them easily, for they were no stronger than those he had faced before. But he was soon shocked when he discovered their numbers were far too many. Fear overtook him, so he abandoned the fight and ran away until he rushed back quickly into his cave. There he discovered something new among his skills, a magical ability to create anything he desired. He used it at once to craft a sturdy door for his cave, to protect himself from monsters and keep them from entering. After long training, Haruka finally succeeded in hunting a rabbit, putting an end to his suffering with plant food and tasting meat for the first time. But suddenly he was shocked when he caught sight of some of his classmates, led by the arrogant group of boys who had always bullied others. Haruka grew nervous at once and tried to hide himself so they would not see him, slipping away from them in secrecy. He used the vision skill he possessed to locate the rest of his classmates. Through it, he noticed a girl who had been his classmate, the only one he had liked speaking to in the past. Yet he decided to rely on himself and not approach anyone, repeating to himself, "This is my chance to raise my level on my own, to become the strongest person in this world." Haruka concealed himself within the forest, hoping no one would find him. But one of his classmates heard movement in the place where Haruka was hiding, and came to investigate. His heart trembled, wishing that his hiding place would not be discovered. Just as the boy drew near, the rabbit that Haruka had caught appeared, and the classmate thought the sound he had heard had come from the animal. So he left reassured. Those boys sat together, while Haruka stood hidden behind a tree, listening to their talk. He soon discovered that all they cared about was play and corrupt thoughts about girls. Even in this new world, they had not changed. He felt disgusted and said to himself that no hope could be expected from them. Then he turned and left, returning to his cave. There, he sat roasting some mushrooms to eat. But when he opened his status screen, he was shocked to see that the skill of solitude was the one that had risen in level. He thought sadly, "This is because I live alone, far from my classmates. At this rate, I will never be able to form friendships or a party to help me later." He sat in thought, then said, "I must make use of another skill so that its level may rise instead of solitude alone." Indeed, he began to employ the skill that allowed him to create many things, working to improve his cave and equip it with tools and furnishings that made it a suitable place to live. When he finished, he felt an intense hunger, yet before him lay only the same mushrooms, and so he was forced to eat them, drowning in deep sorrow. On the 7th day, Haruka was sleeping when he heard a great commotion coming from outside the cave. He rushed out to investigate and saw his popular classmates fighting a group of goblins. He stood hesitating, thinking, "Should I help them? or let them receive a deserved beating from the goblins. But when he used his appraisal skill, he discovered that their stats were very high, and that they did not need his help at all. He murmured with regret, "Why am I always the weakest wherever I go? Even here, the others remain better than me. In my old world they were strong athletes, popular and handsome, surrounded by girls, while I was nothing." Then he raised his head with resolve. "But I will not allow this to repeat in the new world. I must become stronger than them all." As he was about to withdraw and leave them, he was surprised to see goblins circling from behind to attack his classmates. He felt some pity then, remembering that some of them had been kind to him at times, and decided to intervene. He dashed toward the goblins and crushed them with successive strikes until they were gone. His classmates were stunned when they saw him before them, for they had not expected Haruka to have been transported to this world with them. They thanked him warmly for saving them and suggested that he host them in his cave. When they entered, they were amazed by the beauty of the place and by how Haruka had used his magic to transform it into an astonishing shelter fitted with everything one might need. One of them whispered to his companion, "Is this a cave or a seaside villa?" They sat together, and Haruka asked them, "But tell me, why did you separate from the popular group?" One of them answered, "We quarreled with them last time." Haruka pressed for details, and his companion began to recount what had happened. "When we first arrived in this world, we were terrified. We did not realize at first that we were truly in another world. Many of our classmates burst into tears like children, but some of the well-read students who had read about isekai worlds possessed abundant information about them. After that, the popular students came to us and ordered us to tell them everything we knew or they would beat us. Then the class president, your classmate who knew much about isekai because she used to listen to your stories about them constantly, intervened. She asked them to calm down a little and said she would help them with whatever information they needed. But their loud voices attracted a large crowd of goblins toward them. The class president panicked and began to shout at them. Even those who had boasted of their courage fell to the ground screaming in terror. Only the knowledgeable students realized that these were merely weak goblins that could be killed easily. Therefore, they used the weapons and magical abilities they had obtained in this world, and managed to defeat the goblins with ease. When the athletes and the popular boys saw the genius students overcoming the goblins without difficulty, they decided to join them and lend their aid. Thus together they were able to eliminate the monsters that were attacking them. Afterward, the class president used her special skill to find a safer place for them, and indeed she led them to a site beside the river. There, they began to set up a simple camp and learned a primitive way of life similar to a safari, so that they might rely on themselves. Then they divided into small groups, each one assigned to a specific task, and everyone worked according to his role. But it was not long before the popular girls grew weary of the many manual chores and decided to stop helping. When the class president asked them to return and lend their support, they refused, mocked her, and left. Seeing this, the athletes and the popular boys also chose to withdraw and abandon the work. This left the class president in shock, not knowing how to act or what to do. Thus, only the genius students remained in the group, continuing to gather wood and resources. During this, they were suddenly confronted by another large band of goblins. They tried to seek help from the others, but the popular boys and the cute girls refused to intervene, staying idly where they were with indifference. At that, the genius students resolved to act on their own, facing the goblins and defending the camp with courage. After their victory, they determined to raise their levels so they could become stronger than the popular boys and the other students. The reason was that when those popular boys had first entered the world, they had chosen worthless skills such as magic of human control. It was clear they had selected them only to exploit the girls and force them to obey. At night, the genius students watched them deliberately kill goblins one after another solely to raise their levels quickly so that they could use those vile skills upon the girls. Then the genius students overheard their entire wicked plan and hurried to tell it to the class president so she could prepare. She in turn resolved to raise her own level as well and devised a strategy with the knowledgeable group. When they confronted the athletes and the popular boys, those tried to use their strength and magic against her. But the surprise was that they were struck with shock, for it turned out that the class president was far stronger than they. She defeated them swiftly, after which the genius students sealed their magic and even stole away the worthless skills they had obtained. After that, they decided to banish them from the camp and warn them never to return. Yet the hearts of those boys were dark, and later they came back bearing weapons, attacking the camp without mercy. They slew a great number of students and set fire to the entire place. Before leaving, they shouted, "We will return again to finish you all completely." At that moment, the cute girls began casting blame upon the genius students, accusing them of causing the enmity with the popular boys and the athletes, and of failing to protect them and defend the camp. When Lena tried to defend them, they paid no heed to her words. Afterwards, the students gathered and decided to expel the group of the genius students from the camp and not allow them to stay after the camp had burned. We return from the flashback to see Haruka comforting them, saying, "Do not worry," and taking charge of preparing a delicious mushroom feast, making them eat until they were full, and they marveled at the amount of mushrooms he had gathered. The next morning they departed carrying sacks of mushrooms each over his shoulder, and then one of them offered Haruka to join them on a journey to look for a town from which they might begin their adventure, telling him they carried books about isekai worlds and would guide him with them. Haruka was surprised, and despite his desire to go with them, he drove them away, saying, "Go, I do not want to be with you." He knew that if he joined them, he would be a burden, for his levels were far lower than theirs, so he chose to return to the forest to raise his skills alone. On the road, a wolf intercepted him and attacked, biting his hand. Haruka seized the wound and placed his hand on its head until he finished off the wolf, feeling afterward that the bite's force far exceeded the weak strength of the goblins he had met before. Haruka continued on until night fell, and he reached the camp where his friends had been, only to find it empty. He used his tracking skill to learn where the others had gone, following their footprints until a river appeared clearly on his path. Upon reaching the river, he was surprised to find the cute girls standing before him. He tried to hide and then fled quickly, but they chased after him and demanded that he stop. Haruka halted and asked them, "What do you want from those who were expelled from the camp?" They answered that they wished to apologize to that team, and entreated him to reveal their location so they could make amends. Haruka told them that the time had passed, and that finding them now would not be easy, whereupon the girls broke into tears. Haruka was silent for a moment, then advised them firmly, "If you do not learn how to cope in the forest, you will be slain easily." When Haruka looked into his skills, he discovered that he possessed the skill of domination, granting him the power to subdue anyone and make them his follower. He thought for a moment, then justified it to himself, saying, "If I control these 3 girls, they will stay with me, and I will protect them from the dangers of the forest." And indeed he used the skill on them, but was shocked at the result, for they turned into something like machines, silent and expressionless, obeying his commands without thought. Haruka sat bewildered, wondering how he could return them to normal after entangling himself in the use of that skill. While he was lost in thought, Lena suddenly appeared, calling out to him with no response. She came closer and gave him a light slap on the ear until he noticed, startled when he saw her and almost mistaking her for a ghost. She said to him angrily, "Where have you been all this time?" The rest of the girls arrived at that moment, realizing they needed a place to rest, for the long marches through the forest had exhausted them. But they soon noticed that the girls who had followed Haruka were standing like statues with strange lifeless expressions. She asked him, "What have you done to them?" Haruka grew flustered and did not dare confess, lying instead. "I found them like this from the beginning. I did nothing." But the truth became clear, and Lena shouted at him in anger. "This magic was meant to be used only on monsters, not on your classmates." Everyone looked at him with disgust, until he seemed in the worst possible light among them. Haruka tried to leave them and walk away, but they called after him, "Will you abandon us alone in this forest?" Inside, he longed to return to his dwelling to rest, but Lena tried to awaken the girls he had dominated, shaking one of them until she regained consciousness. Then the other girls gathered around her, questioning what had happened and how Haruka had gained control over them. Haruka tried to use the moment to slip away quietly, so his shame would not deepen further, but they noticed his attempt to flee and stopped him, saying, "Wait, we are not finished with you yet." Afterwards, he sat trying to improve his construction magic, though he had not mastered it and used it clumsily. Meanwhile, Lena learned from the girls that Haruka had been with them all that time, helping them and not abandoning them as the other boys had. Her stance shifted somewhat then, and she thanked him for not leaving them behind. Then, Haruka offered them the idea of going to his home, and they reacted in disbelief, saying, "A house? In the middle of the forest? Are you joking with us?" But he answered with seriousness, "Yes, my home, which I built here with my own hands." At that, their astonishment faded, and for the first time they felt hope that they would not have to sleep in tents anymore. They asked him, "And what is in this house of yours?" He replied with confidence, "Everything you need. A kitchen, a bath, and rooms to sleep in." Their eyes sparkled with joy then, and smiles spread across their faces. They decided to go with Haruka, and he was filled with joy, for all the girls would now live in his house, and he was the only boy among them. He led them through the forest, following the marks he had left on the path, so he would not get lost, and after a long walk, they finally reached the house. Weariness was clear on their faces, but the moment their eyes fell on the building, they were overcome with astonishment. They could not believe that such a place existed here, and they rushed eagerly to explore every corner as though they had returned to ordinary homes like those they had once known in their former world. Haruka showed them the kitchen and the bath, and they left him at once to hurry for a shower as though nothing bound them anymore. Feeling embarrassed for being the only boy, he chose to stay in a small tent outside, leaving the entire house to them. That night, Lena came to him, expressing her gratitude, telling him that the boys had abandoned them, while he alone had decided to help. Not only that, but he had provided them with a house equipped with a kitchen, a bath, and rooms, making them feel as if they were still in their old world. At that, Haruka promised them he would not abandon them, and would remain with them until the end. With the sunrise, one of the girls slipped into his tent to wake him for breakfast. When he asked her, he was astonished to see fish on the table, and he eagerly began eating after long days of mushrooms alone. He could not hide his joy, for he had always failed to catch fish himself. He soon discovered that the girl Akame had brought it, using her lightning magic to strike fish directly in the water. He admired this greatly and asked her to repeat it before him. When she gathered energy in her hands, he used his wrapping magic to copy her skill and learned it at once. He tried it in the river and caught fish as easily as she had. Haruka realized then that the worthless skills he had first received were not without value as he had believed, for they granted him the power to imitate what he saw. Yet the lightning force he had copied was so fierce that it nearly drove him to flee to the bath in distress. Afterward, he sat with Lena speaking about the future, and she told him they had not yet decided, but most likely they would head for the city. Still, she thought it impossible before they raised their levels. They asked him to train them, and he agreed, then checked their levels only to find that the weakest among them was already at level 16, while he himself was still only at level 7. The news struck him like a bolt of thunder. They decided to face wolves no stronger than level 8 and thought it would be an easy matter. But the surprise was harsh. Those weak wolves managed to defeat them all. They were swift, their attacks painful, and the girls' high levels did not avail them. Deep discouragement settled upon them, and they sat together at Haruka's tent, planning how they might overcome the wolves next time. At that, he grew irritated, for they had abandoned the house he had so carefully built and chosen instead to crowd with him in the small tent. On the following day, Haruka was eating when Lena called the girls to begin their training and raise their levels. They started by fighting goblins weaker than the wolves, so their levels would increase, and afterward they decided to challenge the wolves themselves to take revenge. The wolves still thought the girls were weak, believing their defeat would be easy, even mocking them. Haruka noticed that some of the girls avoided fighting by pretending to be sick, while fear took hold of others. At a critical moment, a wolf rushed at one of them, but another showed courage and struck with her sword. The wolf caught the weapon in its jaws, trying to stop her, but her companion kicked it powerfully, sending it flying. Soon the girls worked together and managed to bring down those weak wolves and claim victory. The girls rejoiced at their triumph, celebrating after proving that constant training had borne fruit. They even went to the wolves to apologize, declaring that they were ready to face them at any later time. While Haruka sat alone, Lena came near and told him that the time had come to go to the city, but he replied indifferently, "Who said I even want to go with you in the first place?" He then gathered large amounts of mushrooms to serve as provisions for their journey. They all set out for the city with joy, but Haruka warned them that the road was filled with dangers and no one knew what they might encounter, as though he sensed danger drawing near. Indeed, that night a boy was seen running in terror, stumbling and falling to the ground, begging his pursuer for mercy. But the masked man who came near showed no mercy in his heart, seizing him and strangling him to death, then leaving his corpse behind while laughing madly. Afterward, Haruka continued his journey with the girls, having agreed to accompany them to the city. On the road, a giant orc of level 11 appeared. Haruka told the girls to hide, boasting that he would take care of it himself, and declaring they should watch his greatness as he defeated the orc with ease. He charged at the monster with his pitiful wooden staff, but the orc struck him with its heavy club. Suddenly, Haruka vanished from before it. He had retreated behind a tree, laughing mockingly at the orc's slow movements. He remembered his classmates once saying that orc bodies were tough, able to withstand any physical attack, and that the only way to defeat them was through magic. Haruka opened his status screen searching for the proper spell, and discovered that he possessed grand magic, in addition to lightning, water, and earth magic that he had learned from the girls thanks to the rapping skill. He sat laughing foolishly as he tested his new power, shattering half the tree he was hiding under, which revealed his position to the orc. The monster charged again to attack, but Haruka kept dodging its sluggish blows. Suddenly, he appeared behind it and struck it on the head with his staff. To everyone's astonishment, the weak blow actually took effect, and the orc fell to the ground. Haruka wondered to himself, how could a monster of such size with such high defense fall from a strike like this? After that, Haruka told the girls that next time, if they faced an orc, he would use his magical power against it. And when a new creature of that kind appeared, he summoned fire magic, shaping a blazing sphere in his hand before hurling it at the orc. its face exploding entirely. Haruka felt proud as he used his new strength that allowed him to fell the monster in a single blow. But the girls cried out in protest, insisting that the speed with which he dispatched the beasts left them no chance to learn anything from him. That night, the girls sat eating mushrooms in joy, while Haruka employed earth magic to secure the area from any possible attacks. He opened his magical map to ensure the path toward the city was safe, when he suddenly sensed the presence of people nearby. He realized that a group of humans was moving toward them, and guessed they might be the delinquent boys from school seeking revenge on the girls. But what happened was different. The popular students and the athletes whose ties with Haruka had been good even before coming to this world arrived. Haruka asked them if they too had come to take revenge on the girls, but they grew angry with him and affirmed that they were his friends and could never be like those thugs. They explained that they had not come to meet the girls, but had come specifically to see him. Haruka asked why they had left the girls alone, and they answered that they trusted no one, not even the girls, because they had heard of a dangerous skill called the doll skill, or abduction. This ability granted its owner the power to control others and steal their skills entirely. When they questioned some of their classmates about it, none knew anything, which meant either the girls possessed it or Haruka himself did. Haruka decided to frighten them a little, telling them that he indeed possessed that skill, but they showed no fear, instead saying that he was a good person, and that if he had it, then they were safe. Before leaving, they warned Haruka about the delinquent boys who truly had come to take revenge on the girls. Then they apologized for being unable to help, and left. Lena had heard all that passed between the two sides, and she was deeply saddened by their departure. On the following day, Haruka asked the girls to prepare their gear, for he was seeking a collection of herbs before resuming the journey to the city. On the road, Lena stopped him and asked to speak with him alone. She revealed to him that she had overheard the conversation of the previous night between him and those boys, and Haruka realized she wanted to speak about the abduction skill, but he surprised her when he said he already knew that she was the one who possessed it. She was shaken, for she had instructed Oda, the leader of the top students, never to tell anyone of it. Then Haruka smiled and assured her that she need not worry or be afraid, for he knew she was kind and would never use such a power for evil. He even added that he was glad someone good like her was the one to hold this dangerous skill. He then reassured her, saying that even if the girls learned the truth, they would only be happier and trust her more. She could not contain herself, and her eyes filled with tears, deeply moved that Haruka had placed his trust in her. After that, Haruka continued his journey with the girls for 2 full hours until they decided to rest a little. Then it crossed his mind to sell them some drinks, but the girls had no money, and Lena shouted at him to stop exploiting them, for he knew they had no coins. Haruka quickly apologized, saying he had only been joking, then handed them the drinks for free. They continued on their way until Haruka used the search skill, discovering that they were now very close to the river. He asked them to set up camp there for the place would be safe. Then he rushed off to explore the surrounding area at great speed, using the enhancement skill that increased his strength and lightness. He felt his body so light that he leapt high as though flying, but he could not control himself in the air, and crashed violently to the ground, returning to the girls battered from the pain. Lena scolded him for not paying attention to himself. On the next day they continued toward the city, and thanks to Haruka's skills they were able to find a girl who had been lost, as well as a group of cute girls playing by the river, careless about the journey. As they advanced further, they were chased by giant orcs and forced to flee until they finally emerged from the forest. But before them rose enormous hills that blocked their view. Haruka opened his stats and discovered that he possessed the skill of walking on air. He used it and climbed high to see what lay beyond the hills, and there he saw a group of townsfolk under attack from monsters. He rushed back and told Lena what he had seen, saying that they had to be careful because they did not know whether those people were good or evil. He tried to step back from the idea of helping, but Lena held his hand, assuring him there was no need for fear, for they could protect themselves. Haruka agreed and said he would go alone, and if they turned out to be enemies, he could escape with his speed. He used the flight skill again, along with his new wind magic, soaring with tremendous velocity, but he was shocked to find Lena clinging to his clothes. The two of them hurtled through the air at a reckless speed until they crashed into the ground with such force that all the monsters were blown away. The townspeople thanked them, explaining that they were adventurers from the city and that slaying the wolves had been their mission. Haruka gave them some mushrooms to eat and began joking with them until they became friends. Afterward, he returned with the adventurers to the girls, who were astonished to see that some of them were elves, for it was the first time they had encountered such a race. One of the adventurers told them that a city called Amoy was very close by. They continued their march, and the moment the girls caught sight of the city walls, they were filled with joy and ran toward it with great excitement. We then see that the delinquent boys still had their plan in motion, for they had decided first to eliminate the rest of the boys who had abandoned them. namely the popular students and the genius students. We return to Haruka and the girls, who had finally arrived at the city of Amoy. The girls were deeply impressed by the city, its vast size, its shops containing everything they might need. But Haruka, with his solitary nature, found no joy in it, for he preferred isolation. He felt that he had completed his task of bringing them safely to the city, and that he could now leave them and depart. He sat alone to rest a while, until Lena approached him and told him that leaving them alone was not an option. When he gave no answer, she gathered the other girls and explained the new plan. They would go directly to the Adventurers Guild to sell the magic stones they had collected from the monsters in the forest, and then use the money to buy a house in which to rest. When they arrived at the guild, Haruka and Lena both felt hesitant before entering, for the adventurers inside looked like criminals, eyeing them with strange glances. The adventurers themselves were surprised that children had come in to register as adventurers. The receptionist who greeted them found it unbelievable, saying that evaluating all the stones would take a long time and that she could not buy them all at once. The girls did indeed register at the guild, and Haruka was glad that their levels had risen enough for them to sign up as adventurers. But when his turn came, the receptionist refused to register him, for his level was still below 10. He pleaded with her to make an exception, but was refused. He was told that a solo adventurer could not be accepted unless he was at least level 20, and if he had a team, then at least level 10. He sank into his usual despair and depression, feeling once more that his life always went the same way, filled with failure and disappointment. Afterward, the guild prepared a large spacious house for the girls to rest in, and their joy was great when they saw it. The house even came with a personal maid to help them with whatever they needed. On the next morning, Lena was full of excitement and declared that the time had come to go shopping in the city's beautiful stores. As for Haruka, he thought to himself that he had handed the guild a great number of magical crystals, and surely they now had enough money to buy whatever they wished. He returned to the guild to collect his payment, only to be shocked when he learned that the crystals were worth far more than the money the guild had available. They gave him all they had, only 8 million, and asked him to allow them to pay the rest later in installments. While he was overwhelmed with confusion, one of the adventurers approached him and suggested taking him to a special shop of magical weapons. There Haruka saw weapons and tools unlike anything he had ever seen before, and his eyes were caught by a strangely shaped necklace that allowed magical tools and weapons to be fused together. He was fascinated by the idea, and immediately began fusing a large number of items before everyone. The shopkeeper then shouted in anger, "How dare you use the merchandise before buying it?" He explained that the value of what Haruka had fused was 10 million. Haruka was stricken with shock, for he had only 8 million, and he began to cry in distress, repeating that he was trapped. The girls pleaded with the shopkeeper to lower the price and accept only the 8 million. At that time, Haruka sat alone. After all, his money had run out, and the girls could not buy anything they wanted, even though he had promised them they would acquire many things, believing that 8 million was a vast sum. Haruka thought of leaving the girls and fleeing the city to return to his cave in the forest, but he knew that if Lena saw him running away, she would grab his shirt and stop him from leaving. He then gathered what strength remained to him and summoned the stealth skill he had gained after fusing many magical items he had purchased from the shop, thinking that in this way he could escape unnoticed and return to his forest. He slipped out the door while hidden, but Lena noticed the door opening and closing by itself. As he tried to leap over the wall to escape, the girls heard the sounds and called out to him, asking why he was leaving and where he was going. He collided with some signboards by accident and fell clumsily. Embarrassed, Haruka noticed one of the girls inside a clothing shop, behaving oddly as though trying to draw attention, and he scolded her, saying that they were not in their own world for her to be acting so foolishly by removing her clothes. On the next morning, Lena prepared the girls, declaring that the time for their first mission as adventurers had come. Haruka breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that his attempt to escape had succeeded and that he would now return to his house in the forest. Along the way, he noticed some goblins but ignored them, for his only concern was reaching the forest and having nothing to do with others. When he came across a band of brigands trying to steal a carriage with a girl inside, he heard her cries but at first ignored them. Later, one of the bandits spotted him and loosed an arrow to stop him, saying that since he had witnessed them, he could not be allowed to leave. They told him he must die for having seen them. Haruka answered that he had nothing to do with them, but they were not convinced. So Haruka used his new magical staff and unleashed fire magic against them, astonishing them with its power. The bandits realized then that Haruka was of the mage class and decided to engage him in close combat. They rushed him all at once, but Haruka evaded their attacks with ease. They used their weapon skills without pause, but in vain, exhausting themselves while he continued to avoid them. The situation reversed, and the bandits collapsed in surrender. The girl emerged from the carriage in tears, thanking Haruka for saving her. She said her name was Marielle and that she belonged to a noble family, feeling embarrassed and flustered, not knowing how to thank him. Haruka looked at her coldly, then said with a mocking tone that he thought he had found another fool, like the girls from his school. Marielle admitted the strangeness of the situation and told him she was the daughter of the city's lord. She asked him to escort her back to her city, and as they sat together in the carriage, she asked Haruka where he had come from and to which city he belonged. He answered that he had descended in a city called Amoy, that he had never liked it, and that he felt imprisoned there, wishing only to leave. Marielle was shocked when she learned that Amoy was her city, and thus Haruka realized that the carriage had been heading back to the same place. In this way, his plan to escape the city had failed for the third time. We move then to the forest, where the arrogant boys were standing face to face with the athletes. The challenge began between them, and the athletes declared that they would not allow anyone to reach the girls to harm or kill them. But one of the arrogant boys rushed forward with his weapon to strike, and suddenly he was pierced by a strong sword wielded by the masked man. His companions froze in place, stunned by the shock, until one of them decided to attack, but he too was cut down with ease. The rest of the boys cried that they had no choice but to fight, and they hurled themselves at him. Then the masked man revealed his magical strength, summoning the sword of the victim he had slain moments earlier, and struck them together, finishing them instantly. When the athletes saw this, terror overcame them, and they began to flee. But the masked man soared into the air and landed before them, blocking their path, and advanced slowly toward them, ready to end them. We return then to Haruka. Marielle took him to the royal palace to meet her father and thank him for saving her. Haruka remained anxious and restless, so afraid of meeting her father that he even considered fleeing the palace. But Marielle stopped him, saying that he had been invited to stay. A grand banquet was held in his honor, and he devoured the food greedily, delighted to find delicious dishes other than the mushrooms he had grown used to. Afterward, he was granted a special membership card for the city of Amoy, allowing him to enter and leave whenever he wished. When he returned to the girls, his companions, he remembered his earlier attempt to run away, but told them instead that he had been a guest at the city's lord, who had invited him to a great feast and had given him a special pass to enter and leave the city without restriction. After that, the girls departed to return to the forest and complete new quests. At that, Haruka began to prepare to leave as well, but this time without needing to use the stealth skill, for now he had an official permit. Before departing, he decided to repay the remainder of his debt to the magical weapons shopkeeper and to taste the city's food, as a final tour before bidding it farewell. He reached the gate and proudly displayed his permit to the guard, who allowed him through without trouble. He walked in the forest feeling happy that he had at last left Amoy, but suddenly before him appeared the giant boar he had fled from before. He struck it swiftly with his new magical staff and brought it down in a single blow. That night, as he walked through the forest, he spotted bloodstains on the ground and felt that something grave had occurred. He wondered whether the blood belonged to the genius students whom he had parted from earlier, or to the athletes he had seen in the forest. He resolved to use his tracking skill to follow the source, running until he arrived at a shocking sight. The athletes lay sprawled upon the ground in a miserable state, covered in blood. At first he thought they were dead, until he sensed that one was trying to speak, breathing with difficulty. Haruka rushed to take out the mushroom-based medicine he had crafted in the forest, and began spraying it upon them. One of them regained consciousness and looked at Haruka, saying he was glad that he was safe. But Haruka replied that it was they he should be worried about, not himself. The boy told him that their wounds were not deep, then asked him urgently about the girls, whether they had been harmed. Haruka reassured him that they were safe, that he had delivered them to the city unharmed. Meanwhile, Haruka learned that the arrogant boys had been killed by a masked man, and he began to worry about the genius students, wondering if they were still safe or had met the same fate. The athletes told him they knew nothing about the geniuses, and perhaps they were unharmed. They added that no one had been able to stop the masked man or even wound him, and that he had stolen all their weapons. They explained that they had discovered his identity. He was the mathematics prodigy. Haruka then realized that his true target was Lena, because she possessed the abduction skill. Only the geniuses and Haruka himself knew of this ability. The athletes said that the masked man kept pressing them, demanding to know her whereabouts, but they had refused to answer, so he attacked them mercilessly. They decided afterward to retreat far away, to mislead him and prevent him from finding her. But Haruka understood that the masked man might follow the trail of their blood to reach them, and that the only solution was to face him himself. He asked the athletes to head back to the city at once, insisting that he would confront the masked man alone. They were astonished at his resolve, but he repeated his order and forced them to leave. At that time, Lena was searching for Haruka in the city in vain, until she found a letter from him telling them he had returned to the forest once more. As for Haruka, he had learned from the athletes that the masked man was extremely skilled in weapon mastery, and he knew well the danger of that. He sat reflecting on his own skills, searching for a way to overcome it. He found some goblins, attacked them swiftly and defeated them easily, but realized they were too weak and that his level would not rise by fighting them. So he used the perception skill and discovered that the Goblin King was nearby, and he resolved to confront him. The king charged with full force, swinging his club, and Haruka blocked it with difficulty. Then he said to himself, "Now it is time to test my new skill." He used his magical staff to fuse several abilities together, then unleashed a devastating attack that slew the Goblin King in a single strike. He was overjoyed with his new fusion power, but suddenly behind him appeared a strange monster he had not sensed approaching. It was the Goblin Emperor. Haruka thought to himself that slaying this beast might raise his level greatly. He used fusion again and struck the Emperor with a tremendous blow, but to his shock, the Emperor rose unharmed. It countered with a savage assault, and the battle between them began. Haruka dodged the attacks with difficulty until he spotted an opening during its charge, and he landed a heavy strike to its midsection. Yet the danger was greater still, for the Emperor used the healing skill, restoring its wounds, then attacked with sharp claws that hurled Haruka into the trunk of a tree with crushing force. Then Haruka remembered the injuries of his athlete companions, and rage ignited within him, strengthening his resolve. He rose despite his pain and hurled himself upon the Emperor with all his might, delivering a crushing blow that ended the battle at last. Thus Haruka triumphed over the Goblin Emperor, and his level rose to 11. Later, when Haruka looked into his stats, he found that many of his skills had risen in level. Then the masked boy arrived where Haruka was, and when he revealed his face it turned out to be Tanaka. Haruka had already heard from some of the arrogant boys that the reason for targeting them was because Lena possessed the abduction skill, and that the thugs intended to seize it to use for evil purposes. We returned to the girls who had gone out on a new mission, where they came across the athletes who had reached the city in deep misery. They rushed to check on them and asked about Haruka, and were told that he was now fighting in the forest. As for Tanaka, he was obsessed with the thought that the athletes would lead him to Lena so he could kill her and steal her skill. When he saw Haruka, he spoke with contempt, remarking that he was a failure and not worth anyone's time. Haruka answered by pointing his staff at him, saying he would never allow anyone to harm the class president or any of his friends. Tanaka smirked in scorn and threatened him. Their words quickly turned into an exchange of blows, as Tanaka charged his magic power mightily, astonishing Haruka with his strength. Tanaka said that when he had entered the White Room, he had seen all the remaining skills, which were weak and worthless. And if Haruka thought he could defeat him with such pitiful powers, he was mistaken. He then cast a spell that sent rocks crashing down upon Haruka. Haruka managed to evade the rock attack, but Tanaka soon unleashed a new spell, and icy stones erupted from the ground to strike him, which he dodged only with difficulty. Tanaka stepped closer and asked in wonder when Haruka had begun to suspect him and how he had uncovered his plan. Haruka replied that he could not believe a boy brilliant at mathematics would ally himself with thugs. Tanaka was surprised that Haruka had realized this, then explained his scheme from the moment of their arrival in the new world, revealing that he had prepared a spell designed to ensnare Haruka and bring him down. In a sudden moment, thick tree roots rose from beneath the earth and bound Haruka. Then Tanaka launched a powerful fire spell against him, but the surprise was that Haruka was able to absorb the fire magic, something Tanaka had never expected, thanks to a magical plant he had bought and fused with his weapon. Seizing on his opponent's shock, Haruka lunged forward quickly, but Tanaka summoned a mighty sword to block the blow, mocking him, and saying that he had an arsenal of weapons and one mere blade would never be enough. Then Tanaka summoned all his weapons and attacked in relentless waves of power. Haruka defended himself with extreme difficulty, struggling to find a weakness that could lead him to victory. In a decisive moment, Tanaka drew another sword and delivered a crushing strike that Haruka could not evade. Tanaka advanced on him, demanding that he surrender so that he could kill him quietly. But Haruka did not yield. He continued searching for an opening in Tanaka's defenses, discovering that his foe possessed the copy skill, which allowed him to steal the abilities of the comrades he had slain, and that his plan was to deliver it to Lena, steal the abduction skill, and then kill her, becoming the strongest person in the world. Tanaka summoned massive scythes and brutal strikes, enhancing his weapon's strength step by step until his victory seemed inevitable. Then Tanaka Tanaka surprised Haruka with illusion magic, sending him to attack a false image, while Haruka appeared to have set his weapon upon the ground and looked as though he had surrendered. At that moment, Tanaka approached, intent on ending it. At the last moment, it was revealed that everything visible had been a trick by Haruka. He had evaded the attack with ease. He told Tanaka that he was now able to see through his illusions, and that any magical ability he used against him could not remain effective for more than 3 consecutive times. Tanaka realized that Haruka had discovered his weakness, and he rushed at him wildly, but Haruka blocked the attacks and broke them one after another, explaining that he had allowed his opponent to exhaust all his skills in order to identify the flaw. Rage exploded in Tanaka, and he declared that he still possessed an immense arsenal of weapons. He attacked again, but Haruka told him that he had grown accustomed to his speed, then struck him with a heavy blow to the chest. Haruka followed up with repeated strikes that hurled him against a tree. As Haruka tried to finish him while unconscious, Tanaka quickly revived and delivered a strong magical strike. Then, Tanaka spoke in fury, declaring that he did not believe Haruka could ever defeat him, and that he still held a final magical skill unknown to him. Suddenly he gathered a tremendous surge of power, summoning blades and moving at such speed that Haruka was nearly caught off guard. Yet he realized the movement was only a distraction. Tanaka appeared behind him and cast the instant death spell. At that moment it seemed as though Haruka's spirit left his body and he could no longer move, collapsing to the ground. Tanaka laughed hysterically, convinced that victory was his, then kicked Haruka and turned away. But he was shocked when Haruka called out to him, and he saw that he had risen again, not dead at all. Haruka explained that he had fused the healing skill with the luck skill, reducing the chance of instant death to only 1%, and thus he had survived. He added that his stillness had been nothing but an act to buy time to think of how to counter him. Tanaka wondered how Haruka had continued to move at such speed when he had bound his motion with a restraining spell. Haruka answered that he had recently trained in the swift movement skill, which he had named Damiya, and with it he had evaded every strike. Tanaka grew furious again and launched violent assaults, but Haruka blocked them with ease, leaving Tanaka questioning how he had failed to finish him despite having chosen the strongest skills. Haruka told him simply that the laws of mathematics in their old world did not apply here. What was true in Tanaka's calculations did not necessarily mean the same outcome in a world of magic. Then a quick description of Tanaka's former life was laid bare. He had been a quiet student who disliked mingling, regarding others as fools. When the magical gate opened and he was brought to the new world, he thought the chance had come to take revenge and become the strongest. Tanaka resumed his assault with ferocity, but Haruka parried his blow and knocked aside his sword. Yet as Haruka moved to finish him, Tanaka lunged and drove a wild strike into Haruka's chest, then used long-range attacks, striking him madly while he lay on the ground, shouting that his calculations and percentages gave him 100% victory as he had already foreseen. Haruka answered with a staff strike to Tanaka's face, knocking him down, and told him that possessing great powers had made him lazy in developing them, while he himself had labored to strengthen his weak skills until they became strong. Haruka gathered his energy into his staff, and with 2 crushing blows, he ended the battle once and for all. While he left and went away, we see Haruka exhausted and wounded from his recent battle with Tanaka, telling himself that the important thing was that he had defeated Tanaka to protect all his classmates who had trusted him. Suddenly, from sheer fatigue, he collapsed to the ground, but the genius students came to him and said, "Now it is our turn to help you and stand by your side." Haruka then returned to the city and met Lina and the girls, and also met the athletes and greeted their leader, for they had reconciled after he managed to defeat Tanaka. The cute girls then appeared and apologized to the genius students for having driven them out of the camp earlier, and at that moment Haruka decided to withdraw and return to the forest to live alone as he wished. But he was surprised to find Lina standing behind him and pursuing him, telling him where he thought he was going, and that she had been very worried he might not return, so she would not allow him to leave and live alone. She added that all their classmates were angry with him because he had caused them great anxiety during that time. Then she grabbed him by the collar and dragged him back into the house. The next morning, Haruka awoke from a strange and terrifying dream he could not interpret. He then went out talking about his injuries from the fight with Tanaka, and before he set out, he met the genius students, who told him they were heading to a certain dungeon. He asked if they were going there, and they replied that a rare element lay within it, and that if they obtained it, their opinion of him might change. Haruka listened and said to them, "You are the ones meant to obtain this element, for you are geniuses, and the whole city hates you." When they left for the dungeon, Haruka thought to himself that he had defeated Tanaka and protected his friends, and that there was no reason for him to remain in the city, so he decided to return to the forest once more. As usual, when he attempted to depart, Lena stood behind him angry, demanding that he cease deciding to leave them alone, shouting at him because she had not known where he had disappeared during that time and feared he had put himself in danger. Haruka felt afraid of losing her, and when he thought to flee, she seized him and said that if he did anything after that without telling her, she would strike him. He apologized immediately and promised not to do anything or go anywhere without informing her. Haruka then thought about what the geniuses had said regarding the rare element in the dungeon, and decided to obtain it to win back the favor of his angry classmates, including of course Lena, who might change her view of him and love him so she would not be upset. After that we go to Marielle, the daughter of the city's lord whom Haruka had rescued earlier, and find her speaking with her father, worried about the monsters that had recently appeared near the city. She said that merchants were avoiding coming because of those monsters, and that the city might go bankrupt and be put in danger. Suddenly a guard entered shouting that large numbers of monsters had gathered around the city. We return to Haruka, who had left the city and gone to the dungeon searching for the rare element. On his way he encountered many monsters and goblins. He decided to warm up before entering the dungeon and prepare himself to defeat those creatures. Meanwhile, Marielle arrived at the Adventurers Guild to warn them of the massive gathering of monsters and goblins around the city, and the guild called all adventurers to assemble and face the threat. While Haruka ran quickly to slaughter the monsters and goblins, he wondered why they had gathered around the city in such numbers, but with a single blow he was able to destroy them all. At that moment, every adventurer of the guild was gathering at the city gate, ready to confront any attack that reached them. Haruka returned to face the Goblin King. Nevertheless, Haruka succeeded in annihilating the army of monsters and goblins by himself, then reached the dungeon gate and found a guard there. He used his stealth skill to enter without being seen. Inside the dungeon he began to roam the first floor in search of the rare element, but found only ordinary chests containing trivial resources of no use, which left him frustrated and tired. He said he should ask someone about the nature of the rare element. He immediately remembered the merchant who had sold him the rare weapon, thinking the man might know useful information, and decided to return to question him. While the adventurers gathered preparing to face the monsters, they suddenly noticed a great movement before them and feared the beasts were about to attack. But the shock came when they saw Haruka standing before them. Lena ran to him quickly to check on him, and the surprise was that everyone learned Haruka alone had been able to defeat all the monsters without any assistance. Of course, Lena was angry with him for risking his life and acting alone. The guildmaster told him that what he did was unacceptable, saying one must not act alone even if one is strong, for one mistake could cost one's life. Everyone was displeased with him, so Haruka resolved to obtain the rare element because it was the only way to regain their affection. He went to the rare weapons merchant seeking information rather than purchase. The merchant grumbled, saying he had nothing to sell and asking to be left in peace, but Haruka reassured him that he had not come to buy, but to ask about the rare element. The merchant told him that the rare item was a very special ring and that if he acquired it, it would change anyone's view of him. Haruka grew excited and said the geniuses had been right and that he must find it before them. The merchant told him the ring lay on a certain floor, but warned that the dungeon had more than 50 floors and that some floors had not yet been explored, and that it was impossible to find it on the first floor as he had supposed. The merchant frightened him further by saying that every floor had a boss or monster that must be defeated to proceed to the next level. On the other hand, Lena continued speaking with the genius students, and from them she learned that Haruka had gone into the dungeon seeking the ring. She decided to unite with them so they could reach him quickly before his recklessness exposed him to danger inside. On the next day, while Haruka was heading toward the dungeon, he was startled to find Lena and all his classmates behind him. She told him, "Did I not say you must not go anywhere alone?" Then added that they knew he was going to the dungeon, and so they had decided to go with him and not leave him by himself. They all entered the cavern, and Haruka moved through it with confidence, but Lena warned him that he could stumble into a trap at any time. He reassured her not to worry, yet the fool stepped on a hidden switch and a gate opened beneath his feet, sending him plummeting. He fell into an endless void until at last he saw the ground below. He used his magic to soften the floor at impact so he would not die. He then wondered whether he had reached the final floor or not. When he tried to use flight magic, he could not ascend, so he chose instead to employ spatial awareness magic to study the area and learn how to move and escape. He began to chart his course, but suddenly he sensed a terrifying magic aura that froze him in place and stopped him from moving. Meanwhile, his classmates searched for him after reaching the 47th floor without finding him. There they discovered a teleportation gate and said that if Haruka managed to clear the floor he was in, a similar gate would appear for him to exit toward them. But the problem was that with every floor the boss became stronger than the one before, until they reached the dungeon master with tremendous power. This was exactly what Haruka now faced, for he had found himself before the dungeon boss. When he saw it from afar, he felt the dreadful power it held. He opened its stats, and the shock was that every one of its skills was at maximum level. He resigned himself to the reality and charged in to strike, but his attack was blocked with ease. Haruka was surprised, then thrilled, saying, "This is the monster I have wished to face for so long." He began searching for a way to overcome its great speed, deciding to double his magical force so he could move faster. He tried to accelerate again and again, striking whenever he saw an opening, but the dungeon master anticipated all his moves and parried them. Haruka grew frustrated as not one blow landed, but he continued relentlessly, with every strike repelled. Suddenly he felt the boss's sword pierce his body, but then realized he had awakened a new perception, foresight itself, letting him see the future. Without it, he would indeed have been struck. He continued the fight, striving to surpass the boss's speed, but he could inflict no harm, and strangely, he found himself enjoying the battle. With time, fatigue overtook him, and he sank to the ground in surrender, marveling why the dungeon master did not attack him, though it had the chance to kill him. He realized that the aura radiating from it was unlike any monster he had fought, and that it had no intent to kill him. Haruka shouted in anger, "Do not mock me like this!" He tried to strike, but failed again. Suddenly the boss pinned him and set its sword to his neck, yet still did not kill him. Then Haruka noticed that the dark aura surrounding it was what controlled it and gave it orders. He began absorbing the dark energy with his magical staff, and at last he overcame it. He then saw the dungeon master standing quietly before him, laying down its sword. Haruka understood that its aim had never been to fight him, but to find someone to free it from the darkness that bound it. He threw aside his staff and embraced it, saying, "I also do not intend to kill you." The boss's face changed, and its true form appeared. It was a girl weeping. Haruka used the control spell upon her, but when he used appraisal magic, he was shocked to discover that the dungeon master was a girl, not a boy. Afterward, he tried to leave the 100th floor, but when he opened the door, he was stunned to find a powerful knight of level 100 waiting. Haruka panicked, saying, "It is not fair to fight two level 100s one after the other." He thought how he might avoid battle and escape, so he used his magic to blow up the ceiling and flee. But when he climbed out, he was shocked to find strong monsters awaiting him. They leapt at him to attack, but became occupied fighting the knight instead, until they all destroyed one another. After that, Haruka decided to give the dungeon master a proper armor instead of the grim skeletal form she bore. When she wore it, her form changed completely, suiting her at last. But then Haruka discovered that the armor was cursed, binding itself to anyone who put it on. Meanwhile, as all this was happening, Lina and his friends were still searching for him, having reached the 50th floor without finding him. When they opened its door, they were stunned, for before them appeared a terrifying boss with 4 arms and a single eye. Here was Marielle, daughter of the city's lord, thinking of Haruka as the only one capable of ending the chaos. Her father quickly gave orders to hide the townspeople in shelters so they would not be terrified by the monster attack, while everyone prepared to face the coming invasion. We return to Haruka, who in one of the dungeon floors faced a flock of savage eagles. He took a fish from his pocket, sprinkled it with paralysis powder, and once the eagles devoured it, they all collapsed helplessly to the ground. Meanwhile, Lina and Haruka's friends were rushing on their path in search of him, but suddenly, a pack of wild wolves blocked their way, leaving no option but to fight. At the guild, after they had repelled the first wave of monsters, they were utterly exhausted. The guild master realized they would not withstand another wave, and remembered Haruka's great strength the last time. They all agreed that the only hope was for him to save them, so they sent Marielle in haste to tell him that he must kill the dungeon master before another wave of monsters arrived to destroy the village. At that moment, Haruka had reached a floor filled with a vast lake of whirlpools. He wondered how to cross it, but suddenly countless piranha appeared beneath the surface and began to attack him. He realized that crossing the lake like this meant he would become a meal in their jaws. Then, an idea struck him. He used ice magic to freeze the water around the fish and slow their movements. The plan worked, and he managed to cross. But the surprise came when the piranha boss, an enormous fish, lunged at him and dragged him into the water. Quickly, he used earth magic to create a board and surfed upon it, then leapt high and landed upon the giant fish with a single blow that ended it. Haruka continued ascending from floor to floor, gathering resources dropped by the monsters, while he noticed that the dungeon master beside him seemed frustrated at gaining nothing. He smiled and gave her all the resources, which transformed into magical energy. She then lifted her mask for a moment, revealing her true face before covering it quickly and running after him. As for Haruka's companions, they had finished fighting the wild wolves, but the battle had drained them completely. At the same time, Haruka reached a floor resembling hell itself, flames raging everywhere and the air almost gone. He began to choke and nearly collapsed, but the dungeon master caught him to save him. He then broke a gap in the wall and used wind magic to bring in enough air to breathe, and he spoke cheerfully, as if no danger had ever existed. Lena heard him through their link and hurried to tell him they were now very close, only a few floors away, and she urged him to kill the dungeon master to end the monsters threatening the village. But Haruka flatly refused, telling them she was with him now. They thought he was boasting, while he remembered the first moment he had met her, when she had chosen not to kill him, and how she had helped him greatly after he freed her from the curse. He told Lena that he had a plan to eliminate the monsters without harming the dungeon master. She answered with a weary smile. It is true that Haruka always makes us worry with his recklessness and disasters, but I trust his decision. Back in the city, the hordes of monsters drew ever closer, and the adventurers began fighting them, but they were worn down by the endless numbers. They shouted at the guildmaster not to remain idle, but he answered that there was no solution but to hold out until the heroes emerged from the dungeon and succeeded in slaying its master. And he told them that Marielle had decided to risk herself by heading to the dungeon to deliver to Haruka and his companions all that was happening. On the other side were Lena and Haruka's friends, saying that they had to shorten the distance between themselves and Haruka in order to help him escape the dungeon quickly. At the same time, Haruka was speaking with Angelica, the dungeon master, urging her that they must leave swiftly, for if they remained much longer in that place, they would be reduced to ashes by the fire. Haruka reached the 73rd floor, where he found lizards before him. He used ice magic to freeze them, then Angelica stepped forward and shattered them with her sword. Afterward, on the 72nd floor they faced a swarm of insects, so Haruka used fire smoke magic to suffocate and destroy them with ease. When they reached the 70th floor, they encountered a two-headed hound. With its powerful sense of smell, Haruka had no option but to throw a bottle of vinegar at it. The two heads writhed in agony from the stench, and once again Angelica struck them down with a single blow of her sword. Afterward, Haruka sat counting the loot and treasures he had gathered from the dungeon, but he felt disheartened that he still had not found the magical ring. Angelica advised him to rest a little, for fatigue was wearing him down, but he insisted that time was short, and he had to move quickly. When he entered the 69th floor, he found it resembled a forest. There he faced an owl with magical power to lull anyone it stared at into sleep. He smirked, saying its spell would not affect him, but soon dizziness overcame him, and he longed to sleep, and only awoke while carried in Angelica's arms. He admitted his mistake, saying he should have listened to her advice from the beginning. We returned to Lena and Haruka's friends, who were in battle against a gigantic monster resembling a sphinx. None of their physical attacks had any effect on it. The adventurers panicked and one asked what the solution was. It was said that they would need to devise a new method to defeat it, for it was a legendary beast of immense power. Meanwhile, Haruka had reached the 59th floor, and by using his perception magic, he sensed that his friends were just one floor above and in grave danger. Indeed, the companions were exhausted, lying on the ground despairing, while the Sphinx monster's eyes glowed as it lunged toward Lena to kill her. But at the last moment, Haruka appeared, flying above the beast. He charged his staff with a mighty strike and brought it down, declaring, "Even if you are level 100, you are only on the 9th floor, which makes you a weak monster." At that instant, Angelica rushed in with her sword and cut off the monster's head with a single strike. Joy overwhelmed Lena and the others when they saw Haruka safe before them, relieved after all the disasters he had caused inside the dungeon. But when they saw Angelica, they were struck with astonishment at her appearance. Suddenly, the ground beneath Haruka began to crack. He smiled confidently, saying he had grown strong and no trick would affect him anymore. Yet the ground truly collapsed beneath him and he nearly fell until Lena cried out, "I will not let him fall again." When they looked below, they were stunned, for they saw vast hordes of monsters swarming, all moving toward the city. They decided at once to leave the dungeon and return to the city to support the adventurers there. And indeed, they reached the city and reassured their comrades. But everyone said it was no time for welcomes, for the monsters had begun to advance in overwhelming numbers. This time the assault was not only from land creatures, but flying monsters from the sky as well, until the entire city shook under the strikes, and all felt that no hope of victory remained. Suddenly, Angelica began to move toward them, and Haruka turned to her, saying he trusted her completely. She drew her sword and changed the ground, then created a massive magic circle that surged directly toward the monsters and destroyed them all. The scene was shocking, as Haruka, his friends, and all the adventurers stood astonished at Angelica's power, and how she had defeated the monsters with such ease. Haruka approached her smiling and told her he had been certain she was a strong girl, capable of handling such creatures easily. Then he turned to his friends and the adventurers, saying all the credit was hers, for he had had done nothing while Angelica had ended the battle. At that moment the shock was greater, as everyone realized she was the dungeon master, the one who had controlled all the monsters within. They all wondered about the fate of the beasts, and Haruka answered that they had returned to the dungeon and would not come out again. On the following day, Haruka sat in the girl's house, having gathered all the magical tools he had obtained from the dungeon, and decided to sell them to them. When they saw the vast amount of rare items, he offered them a discount to dispose of everything quickly and earn a good sum. Indeed, he sold them all in moments until nothing was left, yet he remained worried about Angelica, who had spent so long inside the dungeon. He noticed she sat alone in silence, and when Lena spoke to her, she received no answer, thinking that Haruka had angered her. Then Lena took her aside to change her life, removed her armor, and let her live as the other girls did. At night, Haruka lay down saddened that he had not yet found the rare ring. But when he opened his stats, he discovered he had risen 6 whole levels and had learned a new technique called sound transmission. He told himself he could not be content with the strength he had achieved, especially after seeing Angelica's power. He had to improve himself further. The next day, he decided to take her into the forest for training, using his new teleportation skill. He told her to try to catch him, and whoever caught the other would break him. He ran at high speed until he nearly fell from a cliff, but saved himself at the last moment, while Angelica almost slipped from a wet mushroom, and he caught her before she fell. From that moment, the hints of a love story between them began. At night, he sat with her, noticing her tension, her silence, and her inability to speak. He realized it was because of the many years she had spent as a skeleton within the dungeon, which had made her forget how to talk. Yet she tried to thank him with strange gestures, and he understood she was grateful. He told her she was now free, able to live her life as any other girl without fear. She rushed into his arms, embracing him tightly, while he told her many stories until she fell asleep within them. On the next day, they went fishing, and Haruka let her cook the fish, and they spent a pleasant time together. Then he challenged her in combat to see if he had grown stronger. She agreed, donned her armor once again, and struck at him with incredible speed. He barely managed to evade her attacks with his teleportation skill, but realized the gap between their strength was still vast. He tried to strike her, but she hit him on the head with her sword and knocked him flat. He laughed, saying he had thought himself strong enough to defeat her, but it turned out to be the exact opposite. Afterward, he returned with her to the city, and the girls teased him, saying he had spent a wonderful day alone with her. Even the boys came to him saying no one else had ever had such a chance, for he had been with the most beautiful girl. Haruka smiled and told them they were thinking the wrong way, for he preferred to live alone and did not want to bind himself to anyone. He added that he would leave Angelica in the city to protect them, while he himself would return to the forest to live in solitude. But before he could leave, Angelica called out to him, and for the first time she spoke with her voice, saying, "Arigato, thank you for everything you have done." Haruka smiled to himself then, saying that in the past he had never failed to help any of his friends, but now the time had come to live alone, to explore this vast world, and to seek the new adventures awaiting him. And so ends the first season of Haruka's story, while the second season has yet to be revealed. If you are excited, hero, do not forget to subscribe with us, so that we may begin the new season together as soon as it is released. Farewell.